Today I'm going to talk about leadership, authority, and the training of a samurai. This is something I'm very interested in and I've spent a lot of time studying. Many years ago as a Harvard graduate student, I actually did my doctoral dissertation in Japan on leadership development. Anyway, the training of a samurai is interesting because it highlights the importance of developing the capacity to be a responsible authority figure by inculcating a particular set of values and ethics and perspectives pertaining to authority, power, and influence. Now, if you are serious about leadership work, if you are serious about being effective as a change agent, if you are serious about being a responsible authority figure, you really need to work on the self in the way that the samurai worked on the self. After all, you are this instrument of power and influence, and therefore you need to take responsibility for how you use what power you have and how you go about the process of influencing people and intervening into human affairs. If not, you can do a lot of damage to yourself, damage to others, and damage to the systems in which you operate. Now, in the last two videos, I talked about shogun and drew lessons on leadership and authority. The first real shogun was Tokugawa Ieyasu. He was also a samurai. He assumed the role of shogun around 1600, thereabouts. In the Shogun drama series and the book, the character Lord Toranaga, although fictionalized, it's based on the real Lord Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu, he did a pretty remarkable job in uniting a very divided Japan. He was very smart, very strategic, and very political, and also many would call him wise. It is said of him that he conquered the nation on horseback, but being an enlightened and wise man, realized early that the nation couldn't be governed from a horse. It needed more than a warrior to create and sustain a viable, united, and healthy nation. He created a system and a set of principles that worked relatively well. He included many of his former enemies and opponents in the work of governance. And he left behind many teachings, and over the next 250 years, until the shogunate system came to an end in 1868, every young samurai studied his teachings. Not just his teachings, but the teachings of many others, but his teachings were central. So let's pause for a moment. Why is this important? Well, firstly, how you train and develop yourself has implications for how you use your authority, how you operate in the authority role, and for your capacity to exercise meaningful leadership. We can all appreciate that authority work and leadership and change agent work at times can be a dangerous activity. It's risky because you are on the edge of a challenge and you are often on the edge of your competence. That's why in a bygone era, to lead meant to go forth to die. You led people to battle, and as they say, you can't win them all, they'll get you in the end. The riskiness of exercising leadership or being an agent of change, it is still there. That's why you need to do the personal work to increase your chances of success and to ensure you stay alive to fight another day. Now, the samurai did considerable personal work on the self. They were often on the edge of peril and could not afford to allow their fears, concerns, or ego to impede their capacity to act. They had to manage their emotions and not be easily distracted, to be calm and composed in the face of danger, even death. Now, there's a stereotype of the samurai that doesn't do justice to what they were really like. They are often presented in movies and what have you, the way that cowboys are presented in American movies. They have their samurai sword and they are ready to slice and dice if you look at them the wrong way. That tough guy warrior image, the ruthless killer, well, that's really a distortion of who they were and how they contributed to society. They were actually intellectuals who studied philosophy, culture, and the arts. Besides being trained as martial artists, they were trained to be administrators, to be educators, and to be authority figures for their communities. They managed the roads, they managed town planning, they managed the taxation process, they managed the distribution of rice, and they had to enforce laws and resolve disputes. And of course, the higher up they went in the samurai hierarchy, the more they had to deal with the politics of life, internal, institutional politics, and external politics with other factions and groups. Now, in any culture, positions of authority demand a lot of an individual. It can be quite a burden. It's not easy work. In the Shogun story, if you saw the series or read the book, you can really feel just how heavy that burden is on the shoulders of Lord Toranaga, who is the daimyo, or governor of his area. You have all these warring factions, foreigners are showing up on your shores, and there is betrayal and intrigue within your own group. There is much at stake, and there is so much to manage. So how do you know what is the right thing to do? How do you make good decisions? How do you ensure your judgments increase your chances of success? Well, firstly, you need good principles to guide you, to orient you. And secondly, you better do the mental or psychological work, shall we say, to bring discipline and discernment to your thinking. So let me tease this out. The first point about principles. The samurai, when they were young, they went to school, a special academy, and they studied 3 domains of knowledge and skill. One domain was the martial arts, sword fighting, archery, jiu-jitsu. The second domain was culture and the arts, such as calligraphy, poetry, music, and even things like the tea ceremony. Yes, the samurai studied the tea ceremony. And the third domain included ethics and philosophy, but it was practical philosophy based on the teachings of Confucius, teachings that they had imported from China. They had this system of education and development for nearly 1,000 years. It is the key reason the country functioned as well as it did for so long. You had a very well-educated, elite managerial class who shared, for the most part, a common educational or developmental process, a developmental experience. So how did this knowledge, this process, contribute to human development and to the becoming of a good authority figure, someone who could potentially exercise leadership? Now, I should mention that in our adaptive leadership framework, we distinguish leadership from authority. So the samurai are really being trained to be effective as authority figures. And to what degree they provide leadership, that's another matter. That's another challenge. The point is, just because you are very good at authority, you play that role well, you may not be providing leadership. Now, having said that, it's very important to look at how to be effective as an authority figure and to ensure you use your authority to support the work of leadership. And the work of leadership is to get people to face reality, address tough problems, and do the adaptive work of change and innovation. Authority, for the most part, is used to manage and protect the prevailing order. It's not easy to do the work of authority or be a good authority figure and also exercise leadership. Okay, let's look at this closer. The training of a samurai. And we know a lot about it. Japan has always been a very literate society, and its history has been well documented. Firstly, let me say something about their training in the martial arts. That's what we know the samurai for their prowess as fighters. Every day as a young student at the academy, they would spend about 3 hours practicing martial arts. Of course, technical expertise in fighting was critical. Mastery involves a lot of repetition of technique, but higher level mastery, or operating at the peak, that was fundamentally a mental exercise. So you had to put in a lot of time to master the self, your emotions, and the capacity to focus. That's one reason why, besides swordsmanship, they studied calligraphy, for example, the writing of Japanese kanji, the steady hand, the flow of the brush, the artistry of writing. All of that was a way to develop character, inner discipline, but also spontaneity and imagination to express oneself. That also applies to the tea ceremony, but the tea ceremony is about attention to detail, managing the emotions, calming the mind, and giving service to others. The making of the tea improves the self, but you are not making the tea for the self, but as a gift to your guest. It is a contribution. It is a pleasant experience that you are creating. And as a samurai, the use of the sword is not purely to protect the self, but to protect your lord, protect your community, protect your people. The sword is not considered a symbol of death, but of life. It is to be used for a higher purpose, as a contribution, an act of service. Now, besides swordsmanship, they also studied jujitsu. Let me say something about jujitsu, which all the samurai learned. Jiu-jitsu is a grappling art, and it takes many years to master. On a personal note, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for about 30 years. I'm a black belt in what is called Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is the closest thing we have to the old feudal fighting techniques of Japan. Jiu-jitsu is about anatomical knowledge and body movement. In the fighting, it's not about overpowering your opponent, but controlling your opponent and eventually submitting your opponent. In the olden days, if fighting a real enemy, jiu-jitsu was used to break their arm, their leg, or to choke them out, to put them to sleep. You didn't have to bring out your sword and kill them, just neutralize them. And the moves, the technique, they're very sophisticated. It's actually very detailed and very interesting. It's a disciplined cerebral activity. It's not a macho man stuff. It's not about being a tough guy. It is a chess game where the skill of body movement and technique allows even a smaller person to defeat a larger person. Now, let me say something about the philosophy and system of ethics that the samurai studied, which is, once again, very important for any authority figure. It was primarily what is called neo-confucianism. Neo-confucianism provides a set of principles, teachings on how to be an upright and ethical authority figure. That's its whole aim. Neo-Confucianism was a more modern or contemporary expression of the old form of Confucianism. And Confucius wrote his great works 2,500 years ago. But over the centuries, his ideas have stood the test of time, but they have also been modified, adjusted, reinterpreted, built upon to deal with the changed conditions and new challenges. Thus the term Neo-Confucianism. In Japan, the samurai studied the great four classics which came out of China: the Great Learning, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Analects, and Mencius. These were guidebooks on how to be an honorable and respected authority figure. For example, Confucius taught that a true prince was not one born to that position, but someone who exemplified the highest virtues and values. Mencius, one of the great teachers, he taught that when a ruler forsakes the path of virtue and engages in misrule, corruption, or having no concern for the well-being of the people, he can and should be removed. He is no longer a legitimate ruler, a legitimate authority figure, we might say. The way you maintain your legitimacy, your authorization, is through the highest ethical standards, by trustworthiness, by self-cultivation in the pursuit of wisdom, and through acts of generosity, kindness, benevolence, and service. Now, generally, when you think of samurai, you don't think of benevolence, kindness, or generosity. I mean, the samurai movies haven't helped in that regard. Now, Japan had its own teachers and interpreters of these great Chinese classics, giving it a distinct Japanese flavor, shall we say. For example, Shimazu Tadayoshi. He was one of the great samurai teachers. He developed a whole curriculum that was built around these neo-Confucianist teachings, but with a distinct Japanese essence. Thousands of young samurai learned his principles, things like never raise or brandish your sword in rage or wrath. Think of your enemy as your mentor, your teacher. Use him as a mirror to see something in yourself. Prepare yourself to confront the unavoidable, and when the time comes, your mind will be at peace. And even when the world is in chaos, do not loosen the reins and leave your action to be decided by the wild horse of the unsettled mind. Remember who you are and act as a samurai should act. You are there to be a role model to all the people, to orient them. You must embody, manifest the highest values and virtues all the time. Now, because the samurai were so prominent in society, I mean, they were everywhere. Not only did they have to exemplify the right set of values, they had to look the part. They had to dress in a particular way. It was important that you carried yourself confidently and assertively. And I think the movies capture that element very well. For example, you had to walk without slouching. You had to have good posture. They were taught to stand straight, head high, shoulders back. And when you sit slowly as if sinking in water. And when you stand, you elegantly raise yourself as if you were smoke rising from the fire. And your hair, if you had any, had to be immaculately done with the top knot or ponytail clean and well presented. Now, coming back to their orienting principles, authority figures need good orienting principles to deal with the array of problems that they face, to help in managing the self, and to serve as a guide for action. The samurai were taught to find and follow the path, the way, the noble path. To be on the noble path, you needed to pursue learning. This is consistent with the teachings of Confucius and Mencius. Learning as a means of self-cultivation, a way to grow in wisdom, a way to understand the world, a way to contribute in the world. This commitment to learning was considered a prerequisite for governance, learning about the sciences, medicine, engineering, philosophy, and the arts, learning about human nature, learning about the self. Now let me say more about learning about the self and the training of the mind of a samurai. The training was informed by Shinto, Buddhist, and Confucian principles. For example, they were taught that the mind is the potential master of the body. Where the mind goes, the body goes. All of the body's activities are under the control of the mind. One of the schools of Buddhism, which was popular amongst the samurai and the governing class, was the Soto school of Buddhism. There are actually many schools of Buddhism, but the Soto school was attractive for the samurai. This is the school that developed and practiced Zen. The young samurai would study Zen, and they would study Zen koans, or riddles, to stimulate critical thinking, creative thinking, and self-reflection. For example, I'll give you one. A student asked the master, "Master, how should a leader lead?" The master replied, "Follow the echo of silence." You figure that out. They would also practice Zen meditation, usually every day. They would sit cross-legged, posture erect, eyes cast downward, and seek to detach themselves from all thought. They would simply follow their breath in and out and allow the thoughts to pass like clouds drifting across the sky. Now, the logic of this practice essentially is that by avoiding attachment to thoughts, it is possible to observe the workings of the mind and eventually to control these thoughts as they arise. With no attachment or cognition, it is possible to simply respond more effectively to situations as they unfold. You can be more present, more in the moment. You could be more free. They used the metaphor of the moon being reflected on clear water to describe this elevated or unagitated state of mind. They would say things like, "The muddy creek does not reflect the light of the moon, but the calm, pure lake reflects it perfectly." It is very interesting because the samurai would spend more time in doing personal work, such as Zen, to cultivate mastery of the self than they would in doing martial arts training. You had to have that self-mastery, not just to help you make better decisions and to not be impulsive, but for the samurai, you did not want thoughts of anger, fear, or even death. You did not want your mood or your immediate concerns to get in the way of your assignment, whether that was fighting an opponent or supporting your lord or responding to the complex and urgent demands of a crisis. You had to be psychologically present, mindful, and attentive. Now there's this wonderful story of the great samurai and Zen master Musashi. He is standing facing his opponent for hours with their swords drawn, and his opponent becomes slightly distracted, like he blinks because of a falling leaf. And Musashi makes his move, and in that single move, he defeats his opponent. If you read Musashi's great book, Gorin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings, it's all about developing that mental dexterity, acuity, and calm. As an aside, I once, for research purposes, studied Zen in a 1,000-year-old Japanese temple, Enkakuji, with the monks. It was an extraordinary experience. And I remember the great abbot, one of the top in the country, he came to speak, and he scolded the younger monks for meditating at night outside with mosquito coils. This was in the middle of the hot, humid summer. He said, "Why are you afraid of mosquitoes? You have to be one with the mosquito, with your environment, and don't allow your mind or body to become restless or distracted by a little bug with wings." That's a window into the training of the mind of a samurai. By the way, after that lecture, I did try meditating without the mosquito coil, and I got bitten all over, had a sleepless night. I guess I don't have what it takes to be a samurai. Now, let me finish this by giving you a real example of what a great samurai can do in terms of being a service-oriented authority figure and exercising a degree of leadership in his community. The name of the samurai is Uesugi Yozan. He was a daimyo, feudal lord, who governed an area called Yonezawa in Yamagata Prefecture. He governed there from 1767 to 1823. Now today we hear of terms like ikigai, which means a reason for living. It's about contribution. Much of Yozan's approach to leadership and governance is consistent with the principles of ikigai. When he became the daimyo, he made a vow to himself to lead Yonezawa with absolute integrity and putting the welfare and the interests of the common people first. He had this profound sense of purpose, of ikigai, which informed all that he did, and he made this well-known statement that speaks to his sense of purpose. Something like this: the state, it is inherited from one's ancestors, previous generations, and passed on to one's descendants, future generations. It should never be exploited for selfish purposes. The people belong to the state, and they should not be administered or exploited for selfish purposes or personal gain. The Lord exists for the sake of the state and the people, and the state and the people do not exist for the sake of the Lord. And he sought to lead and govern with that in mind. That's not bad. Now, his first act of leadership, shall we say, was to address the problems caused by the terrible famine, the crop failures, and the mismanagement of the finances by the local government, where there had been tremendous waste and excessive spending. Much of the community was on the verge of collapse. By way of leadership, he had to instill some confidence in the people that there was a way out of this mess. I mean, people were despondent, they were suffering. But a way out would require a good dose of creativity, doing things differently, making some essential sacrifices, and changing some of their values, habits, and priorities. In our language of leadership, he would have to get them to do adaptive work. Now, as a start to that process, he introduced what is called the Great Frugality Order, which promoted the values associated with frugal living and simplicity. The message was, be simple in how you live and don't take anything to excess. This was because they had lost so much of their resources, their funds and their food and their crops. He promoted these values with the common people, and in particular with the samurai, who were the managers and administrators. And there was literally a few thousand of them. To get attention and to highlight the importance and urgency of change, he decided to use himself as a symbol, an illustration of this new approach. He demonstrated what he expected his people to do, instead of just telling them what to do. He personally reduced his operating expenses dramatically. He changed his wardrobe and didn't wear expensive outfits. And he also went out into the fields to work with the farmers and peasants. And he encouraged the samurai to exchange their swords for hoes and participate in farming and agriculture alongside the village people. By doing that himself as a leadership intervention, he was sending a signal that everyone needed to participate in the work of change, that people should not be constrained by their roles. Now, besides embracing a simple life, he said this was a time for innovation. These problems will keep coming back again and again, so let's change how we do things. Let's come up with new ideas for governance, new ideas for farming, new ideas for business, and new ideas for education. And he wanted ordinary people to be actively involved. Therefore, they needed to be educated. So he established what is today the oldest public school in Japan. That school focused on literacy, the classics, and also practical learning, jitsugaku, the technical and economic skills for daily life. His leadership stimulated and encouraged innovation and experimentation throughout the community. Yonezawa became a hub of innovative experiments in farming, industry, and all manner of public works projects, for example, in road building, bridge building, and irrigation projects, and what have you. They actually became renowned throughout Japan for salt manufacturing, paper manufacturing, pottery manufacturing, farming techniques, food and crop diversification, textiles, silk and kimono production, and a whole array of unique arts and crafts. All this sounds very positive, but as one might imagine, not everyone was on board. When you do adaptive work, leadership work, you can expect a lot of work avoidance in the system, resistance, outright opposition, resentment, even sabotage. Some people might even try to kill you off, figuratively or even literally, to neutralize you and your reforms as they see what you're doing as a threat. So you have to factor that opposition and work avoidance into your leadership strategy. How are you going to deal with that? Because it's very easy to make matters worse. Uesugi Yozan, he faced opposition at every turn, from at least 7 of the big samurai families in his region. In history, it is known as the Rebellion of the 7 Houses. The austerity measures that he was promoting threatened their income and status. The call to participate in agriculture and farming threatened their roles. They came to him and said that enough is enough, let's go back to the old ways of doing things. They were ready to take him out. They wanted to deauthorize him, to kill him. But the old daimyo, the respected old lord, came out of the shadows and stepped in to protect Yozan and tell this opposition group to back off. Yozan tried to work with these samurai and explain to them what was at stake and why these reforms were needed, and also how they could positively contribute to the work ahead. He listened to their concerns and agreed to make a few modifications. He tried to convince them that everyone, high and low, needed to make some sacrifices and do things differently. 2 hardcore opponents, heads of these samurai families, refused to budge. Their pride got in the way. We don't do farming, was their attitude. Nobody tells us what to do or what to sacrifice. Nobody tells us how to live our lives. We run our own show. All this reform work is nonsense. They were very proud samurai. Their loyalty was to the samurai way, to the past. They were not interested in changing for the future. And as a consequence, they committed seppuku, ritual suicide. Sometimes in the doing of adaptive work, the work of change, there will be casualties. But Yozan did succeed with most of the samurai. Yes, his reforms were a challenge to their authority status, to their roles, but he did the leadership work to communicate to them that it was not about their status per se, but the need in times of economic and social crisis to expand an aspect of their work beyond the authority role of protection and maintaining order and being a status symbol with their mighty samurai sword and looking the part with a fancy silk kimono and what have you. In addressing this, Yozan was doing the leadership work of modifying the narrative in how people related to government, related to their roles, and engaged in problem solving and decision making. He wanted people, ordinary people, to feel that the government wasn't neglecting them or simply doing things for them or to them, but doing things with them. They were co-creators of community life, we might say. And the narrative of the samurai, the role of the samurai, the administrator, the warrior, had to be modified to ensure that it was consistent with the values of service, sacrifice, and collaborative effort on behalf of community building. Yes, the samurai had always been taught these values and principles, but many did not live consistent with those values and principles, thus the problems in the community. So Yozan was doing the leadership work of highlighting the discrepancy, shall we say, between what people espoused and how they actually lived. Understandably, some people resented that, but that's important work. Now, there's another interesting part of this story, and that is who he invited to work with him to help in modifying that narrative and doing the adaptive work of change. He didn't do this work alone. He created a network of partners, change agents, which is very important in the realm of leadership. There was a group of samurai and intellectuals called Seigasha. They formed that network. Many were young samurai. These were people who clearly appreciated the need for change. They understood what was at stake. So Yozan enlisted them to drive the work, to protect the work, and to protect him. Without them, he would have been killed. He also invited his old teacher to support him, his teacher that he had as a boy, Hosoi Heishu. He asked him to come to Yonezawa and play a key role in building the capacity for the reform process. Now, Hosoi Heishu is an interesting character. Not only is he a samurai, he is a great educator, a teacher. He would teach the samurai in the morning, and in the evening he would speak with a large group of peasant families and farmers. And the next day he would talk with administrators and then the artisans and the craftsmen. His creative and very inclusive lessons and teachings transcended societal classes and resonated with all groups, earning him immense respect and influence as an educator. Many of his writings and speeches have survived to this day, so we know what he taught. He was a wonderful storyteller, and he used anecdotes and examples that were appropriate for his different audiences at the different levels of society. The peasants, the common folk, they loved him. He gained quite a reputation, and some even called him a living Buddha, which is really something. In one lecture, it is reported that the people cried until their tears drenched the tatami floor. That never happened in any of my lectures at Harvard. He really knew how to get attention and to move people. He was doing the leadership work of enrollment, getting people on board and helping them to see how they could contribute to community building and helping them to appreciate that their contribution mattered. Now, his ideas and principles, they're very interesting. He draws a lot on Shinto, which is the oldest belief system in Japan. It predates Buddhism. Put it this way, he reinterprets certain Shinto ideas to ensure their relevance to the context, to the challenge. I mean, this is very smart because he was tapping into something that is traditional, something that is an aspect of the cultural narrative of the people. He was using these ideas to give energy, momentum, and purpose to the work. For example, he taught that there was an internal purity within everyone, as there is in nature. This purity he called Makoto. The word Makoto literally means truth, authenticity, sincerity, a clean, pure heart. Makoto is the basis for all responsible and ethical action. It is what holds a community together. This purity is corrupted or lost when an individual becomes self-centered, greedy, a liar, harms others, or refuses to collaborate. Things break down. In order for harmony, peace, growth, and learning to come about, a person, the people, the authority figures, had to keep their Makoto pure. So Makoto was not just a philosophical concept or an abstract belief, although it is that, it was also meant to serve as a practical guide for daily life. To keep your Makoto pure and have a productive life, whether you were a samurai, an administrator, a merchant, an artisan, or a farmer, or the great lord, you had to strive for honesty, integrity, authenticity, and trust in all aspects of your work, in your relationships, and in your interactions with others. You had to participate in service to your fellow man, to your community. Makoto also had an aesthetic dimension with attention to beauty. For example, it encouraged mono no aware, the pathos of things. Mono no aware, that's a Japanese term that refers to the awareness of the transience of things, or the poignant beauty of impermanence, that sense of gentle sadness or melancholy at the passing of time and the fleeting nature of beauty. The flower wilts and it dies. The shining diamond-like water flows on. It's fleeting, but that's what also gives it its beauty. So the feeling of melancholy is not simply sadness, but a deep appreciation for the ephemeral nature of life, of the seasons, of the people you meet, of change, of all things. It's about cherishing the moment, seeing beauty in the moment. It's about gratitude. Now, I should mention that Hosoi Heishu, the samurai teacher, he also used poetry, drama, and music, the arts, to promote Makoto. The arts were used to inspire people and for storytelling, for play, and to make life a little more enjoyable and interesting. So the teaching of Makoto, authenticity, and mono no aware, the beauty and the transience of things, these principles were important to help the people deal with the grind of life and the array of problems that they faced. It was a way to uplift them. It encouraged them to find joy and delight in small things, and to do their work with integrity and thoughtfulness, and also to make the essential sacrifices and changes for a higher purpose. So there you have an example of the samurai in action, doing the work of leadership and using their authority in a responsible, enlightened way, of taking the authority role very seriously. Uesugi Yozan, he used his authority to create what we call a holding environment that included a network of partners orienting principles, using one's authority symbolically to get attention and to sustain attention on the work. For example, going into the fields and working with the peasants. The holding environment promoted and protected the experimentation and learning associated with the adaptive work and the creative work needed for innovation. That's important because you've got to conduct a lot of experiments to figure out what is going to work in your particular context. Now, in Yonezawa, even today and throughout Japan, they still talk about Uesugi Yozan with great affection and respect. That's a testament to him as an authority figure and to his leadership. Okay, hopefully this presentation has stimulated your thinking and reflection on not just the samurai, but leadership and authority and the personal development work needed to be effective in both domains. Authority is challenging and leadership work is even more demanding. Doing both is a heavy responsibility, but it is important, and it is important that you don't take the easy path and use your authority to do nothing more than be another bureaucrat in the system or a tribal representative. That can only add to the fissures and fractures that are already there. No, use your authority to advance the work of problem solving, bridge building, positive change and innovation, the work of leadership and the adaptive work. Okay, that's enough for today. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the button below and participate in the comment section. I want to hear from you. Your support is very much appreciated. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video.